Welcome to How's That Working For You, a podcast for the therapy curious. I'm your host, Dr. Zoe Krupka. If you're working in one of the many fields of mental health, we've made this space for you. Come join us in some reflection on these often very strange jobs that we do, in the hope that we can really get to the heart of how to improve our work and our own sense of how to be who we are within it. This is our very first episode and I'm so excited. But the polite place to start really is to introduce ourselves. This podcast is brought to you by the Cairnmillar Institute. Cairnmillar is founded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and acknowledge their deep, enduring connection to land, waters, and community. The legacies of colonization and the ongoing effects of institutional racism have enduring effects on the mental health and well-being of First Nations people, and we hold this continuing dispossession in our minds and hearts as we explore the question of how to improve our work in the mental health field. Cairnmillar is more than just a not-for-profit organization. It's a vibrant community of students, clients, staff, alumni, and generous donors. Our hearts beat for better mental health, which has driven us for over 60 years. At CMI, we believe in a dynamic interplay between training, research, and clinical practice. These three pillars from our triple helix, each strengthening and informing the other. As a registered health promotion charity, we've been pioneers in counseling and psychotherapy in Australia. Our purpose is to enhance mental health through accessible psychological services and innovative professional education. That's where How's That Working For You comes in. This podcast is our way of sharing the extraordinary insights, anecdotes, and life lessons from the mental health field. We're pulling back the curtain to offer you a unique peek behind the scenes, aiming to deepen your understanding of this remarkable space. I'm a senior lecturer at CMI. I'm a feminist psychotherapist, supervisor, and researcher. I've worked in agencies, organizations, and private practice. I've trained in a number of modalities, including emotion-focused therapy and existential psychotherapy, and I have a primary interest in anti-oppressive practice. We're going to have some great guests on this podcast. We're going to talk with other experienced practitioners who will share some of their embarrassing mistakes and professional pitfalls so you can avoid them or at least feel you're in good company. We're going to grill them not just about what they do and what they've learned, but also about the nitty-gritty of how they do it, and most importantly about what their big discoveries actually look like in real life. And if you're just lurking, you're therapy curious and not a therapist at all, hey, welcome. This is a good place to get a peek behind the curtain. Our very first guest is the podcast's very own producer, Dr. Christine Brown. She's a vet and short course coordinator at CMI, a psychologist, coach, and facilitator. She has years of experience working as a psychologist and has also worked as a people leader and an innovation and change specialist. Christine uses a variety of therapeutic approaches, including cognitive behavioral therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy. Together, we almost make a full person. Christine.
Hi Zoe, thanks for having me. This is very exciting.
I'm so excited.
Our very first episode.
I was trying to think about where to start, and I was thinking about, why we wanted to start this podcast, and so much of it sat on this idea that what we do, there's a gap between what we do and what we were trained to do.
Yes.
Which is maybe something we're trying to fill in a little bit, and that's also why we talk about this maybe as a strange profession, because of what's indefinable about that. And I wondered, as a psychologist, you're trained differently than I was trained. I'm a psychotherapist. What's weird about this job, or what's the gap that you think is in between your training and actual real life job?
Oh, that is such a great question, and it really has changed over time. So I was reflecting on my journey into psychology. I trained many, many years ago in the old 4+2 way of getting trained as a psychologist. You can't do that anymore. So I'm a generalist psychologist, and I had a very, very sort of rigid idea of what counselling and psychology was when I graduated from my honours year, and I went out into supervised practice. Very underprepared, it felt like I was very nervous about seeing my first clients. I had background in telephone counselling. I'd done volunteer counselling at one of the crisis lines, and so thank goodness I had those micro skills. But I was thinking, I had such an idea that I had to be this blank slate psychologist, that whatever someone came to me about, I couldn't react. I had to be very sort of unaffected by whatever they were telling me, very like,
The unflappable therapist.
The unflappable therapist. I've seen it all. I've heard it all. You can tell me anything. And I feel like now, reflecting on that practice that I would have been doing way back then, how much less authentic that was to me now. And I had a big break, I stopped doing sort of client work for a while, went into corporate and did people leadership and stuff, and had life experiences. And when I came back, I really noticed this difference of me being me, much more me in the room with my clients, and how much better that landed, because I was still protecting my self-disclosure. I wasn't saying anything that I shouldn't be, but I was so much less concerned and worried about saying anything about myself. I was so paranoid when I graduated. I wasn't allowed to even say, oh, it's hot in this room. I thought that was self-disclosure. So I think it's been really interesting to see how much more comfortable I've become. I react, I wave my hands around, and very different to what I thought I was supposed to be doing as a psychologist way back when.
You just did wave your hands around,
yes.
Even though our listeners can't see that.
they wave around a lot, but I've just embraced that, over time, and that's what people get when they see me.
So then that's part of what we wanted to do with the podcast, wasn't it? Was to find out from experts to what this looks like in practice, who they are in the room with this stuff that they're doing. Feels like for you, part of that was such a key element, such a key gap in your training, is that you didn't come out as who is Christine Brown, the psychologist. You came out with how to be a psychologist.
Yes, yeah. Like this very sort of generic version, and then obviously, things you see in the media or television shows, there's either the wacky self-disclosing boundaryless therapist or the Freudian analyst with the person on the couch. But I'm just actually curious about what you came out with, because you trained very differently to me, whether you had the same idea that you couldn't bring yourself in, or were you more equipped to bring yourself into the therapeutic space with a client?
I think I was more equipped to bring myself in, but what I had, which is a bit of a link with what you had, was very much this sense that I had to be careful about what I brought in. So how I describe that is kind of like the expectation of what it means to be a good mother. So I was hyper conscious of all of my pathology, for want of a better word, and how that might come into the space with someone. I think I was really, really focused on what my clients might need and responding to that, and not to what I needed in the room. So, when you say you waved your hands around, I remember my first couple of years, how still I was.
Yes.
And how tired that made me. So there's some real similarities there, I think. And that's really changed my approach over time, and you've talked a bit about how your approach has changed over time. But I guess I'm wondering, in terms of the people that we're asking to come and talk to us on this podcast, what were the things that helped you do that? Like, who or what influenced you to kind of relax more in the room? Like for me, it was my own therapy. I had so much therapy. Receiving that and watching how other people were gave me a sense of, oh wow, I can be a bit like that, or I can do that. That was helpful to be on the other end of. It certainly wasn't like TV therapists, right? Because they're all awful. But what about you? Like you said, a bit of going into organizations and coming out of psychology and working in other jobs, and you came back more comfortable.
It's such an interesting reflection, because I probably haven't reflected on that. But I think what it might have been was going in and becoming a people leader, and realizing that when you're leading people, you have to bring yourself to work, and that makes you a better leader. So I guess it was developing my leadership skills and trying to find that blend of having the authority, having the power, but also, finding my own collaborative style. I think really then translated when I went back into the one-on-one counselling work, that I'd somehow managed to blend the theory and the practice a little bit better and make it my own.
Oh, that's such a good answer.
Well, it's funny. I only just put it together because of the question. So there you go. So it was a very good question.
Well, so because you're kind of talking about, well, I had to sort of throw myself in. I had to be there, that you became more comfortable with who you are as a person when you're trying to help build someone's capacity, which, you are when you're a people manager. I say this with no experience in management
But
whatsoever.
no, that's right. And I think that the idea that I'm just putting together as we're speaking about this is because there is that power differential. So as the psychologist, you have a certain amount of power in that room, and as the manager you do too. And it's the way you kind of hold that power and recognize that power, but also have that high quality connection. There's a wonderful researcher called, I think her name's Dr Jane Dutton, talks about high quality connections and that warm empathic connection that is generated between people, and how much better that is for everybody when you have those high quality connections. So I guess it's that, just trying to make that connection warm and helpful, but also acknowledging that you're in a certain role that comes with a whole lot of assumptions and power.
So almost like it was that power being really overt, like it is in a management role, that helped you kind of negotiate who you were within that and how you were going to be.
I think so, because I had to navigate, I like this person that I'm, one of my employees, but they're not performing in the role, and I'm working for this business, and so I need to run this business on behalf of this organisation that I'm working for. So having to really try and separate and combine those elements, I think, made me a lot better at doing it back in the counselling space.
Okay, which for some reason this makes me think, I think because you're talking about management, and I'm not sure if this happens for you, but self-help comes into my therapy space a lot. It has a lot over the years. The popular books people are reading at the time, whether it's Eckhart Tolle or they're reading, something horrible from the 90s like The Rules or something, or The Game. And so I'm wondering, because I'm so curious about kind of how therapy doesn't just make people better, but does it make the world better? How do you engage with that stuff when people bring it into the therapy room? They say, Christine, I've just read The Secret. It's 30 years later, but I've just read The Secret. Or, what do you do with that? Because I know you read good self-help yourself as well. What do you do with that? Because I struggle in that area.
It's brought up a funny memory, actually, that I had a client that came in once and said they were going overseas very soon, and they were very, very anxious. And I said, look, I wouldn't normally ever suggest medicating this anxiety, but because you're going overseas, and she was had a very, very anxious presentation, I said, maybe it's worth talking this over with your GP. And they duly went and talked to their GP about this level of anxiety and came back and said, no, the GP says I just have to read The Power of Now.
Okay.
Yeah. And I felt so undermined by that. And nothing against The Power of Now, like staying in the moment and being present and mindfulness is all very much part of what makes things easier for people. But it was just such a funny sort of left field comment that I wasn't expecting. And I'm not sure I dealt with that particularly well. I think it's really hard. I think now we're getting conspiracy theorists coming in. We're getting climate change deniers in the room with us, and it's that real balance of your own personal viewpoints and values, which can't be there in a lot of ways, and trying to hold the space for someone when that's brushing up against maybe some of the things that you think and feel in your own life and your own worldview. But I find that incredibly challenging. What do you do with the self-help sort of aspect of?
I think what I've done over the years is moved into a kind of a radical honesty position, which is to be clear about what I actually do think and to make space for what my client thinks as well, but to accept that those views are going to change, that my views change. They've changed a lot over the years. I've been changed by my clients' views. I've been changed by those conversations. I think where it's really hard for me is the situation that you talk about, where I'm really up against another professional or another really important support person in a client's life. And that's difficult. But that makes me think of another thing we really wanted to do with this podcast, I think, was have the professionals we work with, GP, psychiatrists, other health professionals in a client's life. How do you work with them? And when people say to me, oh, did getting your PhD change your life? And I say, people's psychiatrists now ring me back because I can say it's Dr. Zoe and they think maybe I'm the hematologist. So they'll call me back. But, how have you found that? How have you found the sort of any collaboration you've done with anybody else's healthcare professional?
I think what I've found that I've acknowledged more and more over time is that people are located in a time, space, context, system. And when I graduated, we were very much focused on the individual and the deficits of the individual, as self-help is. To tie that all together, because it's all about, let's ignore the fact that there's all this oppression in the world and there's barriers and the world is not equitable. You just need to have an ice bath in the morning, or get up at 5 o'clock, or, do some yoga or massage, or meditation, I should say. So I think over time I've become more and more aware of this individual in a system, but also not just the system of the political system or the environment or the social setting, but in that network, as you say, of professionals as well. And they all have different inputs and different viewpoints. And, it's that sort of analogy that everyone's holding a little bit of a different part of the elephant, and we're all often not communicating very well. I do work for work cover clients, and that's very much what happens in those kind of spaces is everyone's got a different piece of the puzzle, and it's hard to bring all the puzzle pieces together. So I think it's something that I still find really challenging. But what I've started to do is just get on the front foot as a practitioner and ring the case manager, or really try and start those conversations. And it's funny because they often think that I'm going to be really defensive or aggressive or something, and I'm like, no, I come in peace. I mean no harm to your planet. I just want to talk about this person. I just want to talk about this approach. And I'm finding that is a really good way of trying to unify the different voices in that client's world.
So kind of you're talking about not just understanding the kind of turf, the context of your client, but trying to form a relationship with that environment yourself. So
yes.
To come to meet that other professional and to go, okay, we need to find a space to be able to work together in the service of this person.
And I think there's often this reputation as the psychologist. Oh no, the psychologist, Now
and what is that? What is the oh no, the psychologist? Because I know there's definitely an oh no, the psychotherapist, which might be slightly different. But what do you reckon that vision is of the profession?
I think it's because we're advocates, and we're on the side of our clients, and it's sometimes in a way that they don't want us to be. It makes things perhaps a little bit more difficult sometimes to just stamp the bit of paper or close the file or something, because we're like, well, actually, so I feel like we as psychotherapists and psychologists are probably quite annoying, because we're like, well, there's all these other considerations and it's not as black and white. So we're always bringing in the grey, I guess.
That it's funny when you say that. I don't know why, but it makes me think of, and I haven't had this conversation with you, but I've had this conversation with lots of different kinds of therapists, which is how hard it is to be a therapist socially. I don't tell this story very often, but I used to pretend for a period of time in social situations. I experimented with what would it be like to say you had a different job, because, if I'd said, oh, I'm a psychotherapist, then I would end up in the corner at a party with somebody talking about how their mother just died. And that, or people tell me their problems in the Uber. And so I experimented with other professions. I pretended once I was an architect, and then people told me about their renovation disasters, and that was almost it's just this bad. But yeah, what about that sort of, because you've talked about bringing yourself into, Christine, the psychologist. What about in the rest of the world, in your family, socially? Do you think there's a way you've learned to manage your professional identity there?
I think the funniest thing that I started to realise when I said that I was a psychologist is people genuinely think that I can read their minds.
Oh, right.
For real,
She can, actually, just for the...
Yeah, which I can do is the end of that sentence, yeah. But I was thinking that can't possibly be a thing that people think that I can do. But they really do. I'm thinking... Yeah, Uber drivers, or there's suddenly this guardedness that happens with people where they think that you're, psychoanalyzing them. And once again, it probably goes back to that media. It shows like The Mentalist, where he's just like, I know that you in 1964. So, but I don't know. It's a very funny thing to be. The other thing that surprised me is there's not as many psychologists in Australia as I thought there were. There's only about, I think, 30,000. We might have to fact check this.
Okay.
There's only about 30,000 psychologists. So then I was thinking, well, maybe people don't meet many. And
You're a rare bird.
Rare. And then the other thing is that people still have trouble distinguishing between psychologists and psychiatrists. Even all the years I've been a psychologist, I think it's still a very messy sort of... No one really knows the difference between a counsellor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a psychotherapist, really, full stop. In terms of who can prescribe medication, who can diagnose, who can this, and then we've added that complication of the different college memberships, and I'm a clinical psychologist, I'm an educational psychologist, and I think that the landscape is very confusing for people.
That is probably the number one explainer I've been asked for over the years in the media is, what are these different professions? But the interesting thing for me is that when I do that, and I think I do that really carefully and to the best of my ability, but there is always somebody from one profession who calls in, writes in or whatever and says, Krupka got that wrong.
Just out of interest, what do you say? What's your well-practiced explanation, actually? I'd be interested in that.
Well, really roughly, I would say that, psychiatrists are doctors. They're trained as doctors. Psychiatry is a specialist. It's a specialism like surgery is a specialism, or general practitioner is a specialism. They have a specialist knowledge in psychopharmacology. That's why they can prescribe. That doesn't mean they can't be psychotherapists, but they have to do other training to do that. That psychologists like yourself, and correct me if I'm wrong, have a really strong focus on diagnostics and on research, and a bit of a smaller focus on those counseling skills that you talk about having to develop in your supervised practice. And so again, if you're going to be a therapist, that's kind of extra training above and beyond what you might have graduated with. And then you have the weirdo fringe dwellers, which is counseling and psychotherapy. And I say weirdo fringe dwellers because they aren't protected terms. It's debatable really whether they should be. And the majority of them had a primary profession that was something else, often, an undergraduate degree in another social science or another field, and then went on to do more study, sometimes at a postgraduate level, in counseling and psychotherapy. And the focus there is really on the how to have helping conversations, so on the counseling skills and the theories of change. So it's like, and then of course you've got social workers who have that whole fundamental social structural analysis with, again, a minimal focus on counseling skills, but many of them have gone on to do more training. And so when you talk about the elephant, it's like we all have one specialist piece, and together, we might form a whole mental health service.
Yes.
But yeah, we're coming at the person and mental health from very different perspectives, I think.
Yes, and over time you realise that there's all that research around therapeutic alliance. So the the more connected you are, the warmer, the more trust you have. Whatever profession you're in, the better outcomes the client has, no matter what you're doing with them. So I think eventually, we all start to probably have a blended approach.
Yes, that you wouldn't
over
be able
time.
necessarily to tell the difference. Yeah.
Yes.
And that will be, so if we're going to be talking to somebody about self-help and conspiracy theories, and we're going to be talking to, people about working with other health professionals, we're also going to be talking to one or two key researchers in the area that you're talking about, which is the research on what makes therapy work, on what's common between all approaches, which is really fascinating to me, because our training, or what we're prepared for, is often letting us down, I think, in terms of what actually works in the room, the person of the therapist. So we could even call this podcast The Person of the Therapist, because that's where our focus is. But I suppose what I really wanted to know too about you was this question of, what are some of the things that you think about now in terms of what you're good at? How do you think about your skills? Like, I know I came out of my training thinking, okay, I think I've got a good self-reflective capacity. I've done all this work to get my ducks in a line. I have a good skills, reasonable theoretical knowledge, all of that kind of stuff. I can have rapport with people, but that's not how I think about it at all now, in terms of, I think I feel less clear about what I'm doing than I did when I came out.
I'm kind of laughing a little bit because I think I'm about to give a very cheesy answer. Like, we almost need like plinky plunky music underneath this answer. It's like a very Hallmark moment. I've come to the point where I just love people. I just try and I feel like I just try and be so happy to see them, and just hold that space for them, and try and do the best listening they have in that week. And I think it's as simple as that, and just try and reflect back what they're trying to tell me in just a loving way. But as these words are coming out of my mouth, it just sounds so over the top. But it's genuinely what I think I try and do, and there's this very warm feeling, when the clients and I really gel, and it doesn't happen with all clients, but if we can get that unconditional positive regard, Rogerian sort of feeling in the room, it's amazing. And I think what I'm learning is, if I'm having longer term clients, they end up feeling a lot less guarded with others. So if they've been someone that has been really closed in and shut down with people for many, many years, having that experience of just being appreciated over time seems to warm them up to taking more risks with other people and making those connections, so that we don't end up in a dependent relationship. It's not that they can only get that from me, but having that experience unlocks it with other people, if that makes sense. So I think that's where I'm at the moment, but like you said, it can change. That's my approach at the moment, and that seems to be working reasonably well, but I'm moving soon into work with a different cohort, so it'll be interesting to sort of maybe come back and see what I've learned from working with different people.
Well, I like that kind of as a place to finish, really, because I think you've kind of encapsulated the fact that this job is very, very difficult. What you're talking about doing is a very, very difficult thing, and it's a difficult thing to teach, and it's a difficult thing to move into, but it is also perfectly aligned with a lot of the research we have about quote-unquote client satisfaction, is that as clients we want our therapists to care about us, really care about us in that kind of active, committed way. We want them to hold us in mind. We want them to connect with us. Anyone who says they don't care whether their therapist likes them, I can't imagine that is true. I want my therapist to like me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and get my jokes, but that's maybe that's not as important.
I don't underestimate that as an important thing.
So I'm looking forward to this endeavor. I'm looking forward to what you're going to do, which is to source prime and tenderize our guests before they come on.
Excellent.
And to, really help us to focus on how we can be better through listening to a bunch of really excellent people talk about their stuff ups and but also their process of refining what they do. Just like you just told us about.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been fun. I look forward to more episodes.
Me too. Thank you for listening to How's That Working for You, a podcast for the therapy curious. This has been your host, Dr. Zoe Krupka, with our producer, Dr. Christine Brown. This podcast was brought to you by the Cairnmillar Institute. For more information about our organization, the services we offer, how to donate, visit our website at cmi.edu.au. You can find us on all major podcast platforms, and stay tuned for more inspiring episodes as we explore the diverse aspects of well-being, mental health, and the incredible world of therapy. In the next few episodes, experts will tell us how to gather information about your performance, identifying potholes, and how to know if you're on the right track with a client. This podcast is a space for open conversations, but it's important to remember that what you're hearing are the personal experiences and thoughts of our host and guests. While we're here to share insights, please don't take any of this as advice. We're all wonderfully unique, so if you have therapeutic concerns, it's best to chat with your healthcare professional. While our content is informative, your trusted healthcare practitioner is the best source for tailored guidance.